Do you remember the beautiful vampires from Twilight? It looked like a fairy tale of immortals and forbidden love. But for its cast, the real story began after the final scene was filmed, and it was nothing like a fairy tale at all. Some left Hollywood behind, others struggled with illness and addiction, and some are no longer with us today. Now in 2026, let's find out what really happened to them. Taylor Lautner as Jacob Black. Jacob Black in Twilight wasn't just the loyal friend caught in a supernatural love triangle. He was the emotional storm that turned a teenage fantasy into a cultural obsession. Born on February 11, 1992, Lautner was 16 years old when he played Jacob across 5 films, starting in 2008. The role trapped him inside a physical and emotional image, although it gave him worldwide fame. In 2026, Taylor Lautner is 34 years old and living a quiet, grounded life with his wife Taylor Dome, focusing on emotional recovery and stability rather than fame. The couple has chosen a calm lifestyle away from Hollywood pressure, avoiding public chaos and instead building a private routine centered on health, balance, and mutual support. Lautner has shifted away from extreme physical training and now prioritizes mental well-being, using yoga and lighter routines to maintain both body and mind. But the years that followed Twilight were far from stable, as the sudden collapse of his post-franchise career left him searching for direction while the industry quickly moved on. Projects like Abduction failed to meet expectations, and the weight of public comparison never stopped growing, especially as his body transformation became a constant topic of ridicule and online pressure. Over time, all of this built into a quiet withdrawal from Hollywood. However, Jacob Black still defines how the world remembers him. Gregory Tyree Boyce as Tyler Crowley. Tyler Crowley is the reckless student whose out-of-control truck nearly changes Bella's fate in one of the film's most tense early moments. Born on December 5, 1989, Boyce was 18 years old when he appeared in Twilight, 2008, and even in a single scene, he left a lasting impression as part of the film's opening chaos that set the entire story in motion. Gregory Tyree Boyce passed away on May 13, 2020, at the age of 30 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The official cause of death was an accidental overdose involving cocaine and fentanyl, which also claimed the life of his girlfriend, Natalie Adepoju, in the same incident. Before his passing, Gregory had stepped away from acting after his brief appearance in Twilight, as his career in Hollywood failed to progress despite early visibility. He later moved to Las Vegas and rebuilt his life through a small business venture called West Wings. However, behind this effort was a growing emotional struggle as acting opportunities disappeared, leading to increasing financial pressure and personal frustration. Over time, this emotional weight pushed him toward escapism through nightlife and substance use. His sudden death at just 30 years old became a tragic reminder of how quickly early promise can fade into silence. Robert Pattinson as Edward Cullen. Edward Cullen in Twilight was the vampire whose controlled emotion and eternal conflict made Robert Pattinson a global phenomenon overnight. Born on May 13, 1986, Pattinson was 21 years old when his role catapulted him into worldwide fame, while also trapping him inside an image he would later struggle to escape. That performance became both a career-defining success and a long psychological burden. In 2026, Robert Pattinson is 39 years old and living a quiet, grounded life with his fiancée, Suki Waterhouse, and their child. His career has evolved far beyond Twilight, with critically acclaimed performances in films like The Lighthouse and his portrayal of Batman, which redefined his status in Hollywood. Away from fame, he now prioritizes privacy and stability, stepping back from the chaotic attention that once followed him everywhere. But the years after Twilight were marked by emotional turbulence and personal challenges. The intense global fame brought constant paparazzi intrusion, making everyday life feel suffocating and inescapable. His relationship with FKA Twigs also exposed him to public harassment and racial abuse, adding another layer of emotional strain. Over time, he withdrew from Hollywood's social environment, avoiding parties and industry visibility as a way to protect his mental health. That isolation eventually became transformation, allowing him to rebuild his identity away from Edward Cullen. Kristen Stewart as Bella Swan, a teenage girl caught between fragile human emotions and an impossible love with a vampire. Bella Swan in Twilight became the emotional core of a global phenomenon that defined a generation. Born on April 9, 1990, Stewart was 17 years old when she portrayed Bella across 5 films starting in 2008, and the role turned her into an international star while also trapping her inside a character she spent years trying to move beyond. That performance became both her breakthrough and her emotional burden. In 2026, Kristen Stewart is 36 years old and living a more grounded life after years of intense public attention. She is engaged to screenwriter Dylan Meyer and has chosen a quieter lifestyle, focusing on selective film projects while keeping her personal world largely private. Although successful and critically respected, she still carries long-term effects from early fame, including anxiety and emotional sensitivity, that have followed her since the peak Twilight years. Behind that success, her life has been shaped by a long emotional struggle that began when global fame arrived too early. The overwhelming pressure of being Bella Swan led to insomnia, panic attacks, and a sense of identity loss during her teenage years. The situation worsened in 2012 after the public scandal involving director Rupert Sanders, which ended her relationship with Robert Pattinson and exposed her to massive media backlash. During those periods, she withdrew from public life, relying on smoking and complete isolation before gradually rebuilding herself through therapy, meditation, and a deliberate shift toward artistic independence. Today, Bella Swan remains the role that made her famous, but it is her survival beyond it that defines her real story. Peter Facinelli as Dr. Carlyle. Cullen. Carlyle. Cullen in Twilight stood at the center of chaos as the calm, compassionate father figure of the vampire family, a character defined by control, wisdom, and an almost impossible restraint in a world driven by instinct and violence. Born on November 26, 1973, Facinelli was 34 years old when he played Carlyle in 2008, and the role elevated him into international recognition while shaping his image as Hollywood's emotional anchor figure. In 2026, Peter Facinelli is 52 years old and has moved into a more reflective phase of life, working behind the camera as a writer and director while still taking occasional acting roles. After his divorce from Jenny Garth in 2013, his personal life shifted into a slower rhythm, where rebuilding stability became more important than public attention. He now focuses on creative control and inner balance, stepping away from the constant demands of acting-heavy schedules. But that transition was shaped by a long chain of emotional and professional breakdowns that unfolded over time rather than all at once. Years of overwork slowly drained him until burnout took hold, leaving him mentally exhausted and questioning his direction in the industry he had spent decades building his place in. The loss of his mother in 2016 deepened that emotional instability, creating a period where grief and fatigue blended together in a way that was difficult to separate. Then, when private communication leaks in 2019 turned into public controversy, it intensified his self-doubt and forced him to confront how fragile his sense of identity had become under fame. From that point, his focus gradually shifted inward, toward healing, meditation, and rebuilding a life that no longer depended entirely on external validation. Ashley Greene as Alice Cullen. Alice Cullen in Twilight is the energetic and mystical sister of the Cullen family. Born on February 21, 1987, Greene was 20 years old when she became widely known for the role of Alice, and it instantly turned her into a global fan favorite while also placing her under the intense pressure of sudden fame. In 2026, Ashley Greene is 39 years old and living a quieter life after a series of emotional and personal challenges, including her divorce from Paul Curry in 2023. Although the couple previously endured repeated miscarriages and later welcomed a daughter, Eloan, through surrogacy, the emotional strain eventually led to their separation. Today, she focuses most of her time on raising her daughter while maintaining a low-profile career, staying away from the intense spotlight of her early fame. Behind her public image, Green's life has long been shaped by deep psychological wounds rooted in childhood instability and emotional trauma. Even at the height of her Twilight success, she struggled with fear of public appearances and overwhelming media pressure. After the franchise, when several of her projects failed commercially, she faced repeated rejection in Hollywood. In recent years, therapy has become an important part of her life as she works to rebuild balance while raising her daughter. Her real journey is defined by quiet resilience and emotional survival beyond fame. Elizabeth Reeser as Esme Cullen. Esme Cullen in Twilight is the gentle, protective mother figure of the Cullen family. Born on June 2, 1975, Reeser was 32 years old when she brought Esme to life, and the role gave her global recognition while also quietly defining her as Hollywood's eternal mother type on screen. That performance became both her most visible success and the emotional image she would spend years trying to expand beyond. In 2026, Elizabeth Reeser is 50 years old and living a quiet, independent life after years of emotional setbacks and personal sacrifice. She remains unmarried and has no children, focusing on stability and mental health than constant visibility. But behind that stability lies a long history of emotional strain that began to build even during her rise in Twilight. While working on the saga, she was simultaneously caring for her father after his stroke in 2010, forcing her to move between hospital rooms and film sets until exhaustion pushed her into severe panic attacks and emotional burnout. Later, in 2012, a deeply committed relationship ended after betrayal, leaving her with long-term trust issues that shaped her view of intimacy and family. These experiences slowly created a pattern of emotional withdrawal, and over time, she admitted she has never felt fully safe enough to become a mother. Her real story is one of endurance, quiet pain, and emotional survival beyond the screen. Jackson Rathbone as Jasper Hale. Jasper Hale in Twilight is the quiet, emotionally controlled, war-scarred soldier of the Cullen family. Born on December 21, 1984, Rathbone was 23 years old when he stepped into the role of Jasper, and the performance gave him global recognition while also locking him into the image of the emotionally restrained vampire struggling to control his inner darkness. In 2026, Jackson Rathbone is 41 years old and living in Los Angeles with his wife Sheila Hafsadi and their 3 children. After years of balancing touring life and acting, he now focuses more on family stability while gradually stepping away from large-scale Hollywood productions. Although he still works in music and small creative projects, his priorities have shifted toward mental health recovery and rebuilding emotional balance after years of instability. But behind that calmer present lies a long period of psychological collapse and withdrawal. A terrifying emergency plane landing in 2014 triggered severe PTSD, and that fear of flying, combined with the loss of a close friend during a tour, pushed him into deep isolation. Over time, repeated failures of post-Twilight projects eroded his confidence further, making him retreat from public life and lose trust in the stability of his career. Even his time with the band 100 Monkeys became emotionally complicated as pressure and exhaustion built up behind the scenes. Today, Jasper Hale remains the role that defined his fame, but his real story is one of surviving fear, trauma, and gradual recovery within a fragile, creative life. Kellen Lutz as Emmett Cullen. Emmett Cullen in Twilight is the unstoppable big brother force of the vampire family, loud, fearless, and physically dominant. Born on March 15, 1985, Lutz was 22 years old when he played Emmett. That performance made him a fan favorite, even as it limited how seriously the industry later took him as a leading actor. In 2026, Kellen Lutz is 41 years old and living a quieter suburban life outside Los Angeles with his wife Brittany Gonzalez and their young daughter. His daily routine now revolves around family stability, faith, therapy, and rebuilding emotional balance after years of personal struggle. Although still occasionally active in the industry, he has stepped away from the pressure of leading man expectations, choosing instead a slower, more grounded lifestyle focused on healing and inner peace. But behind that calm life lies a deeply painful history that reshaped everything he became. In 2020, he and his wife suffered the devastating loss of a stillborn child in the final stage of pregnancy, a tragedy that nearly broke their marriage and left lasting emotional scars. That grief was compounded by long-standing family tensions rooted in religious differences, which created emotional distance during his upbringing and carried into adulthood. At times, he coped by overworking himself physically, using exhaustion as a way to escape emotional pain until it became unsustainable. Today, his real journey is defined by survival, through loss, rebuilding, and slowly learning how to live again with acceptance instead of avoidance. Nikki Reed as Rosalie Hale. Rosalie Hale in Twilight is the fiercely beautiful and emotionally guarded sister of the Cullen family. Born on May 17, 1988, Reed was 19 years old when she portrayed Rosalie, and the role expanded her visibility while also reinforcing Hollywood's tendency. That performance made her instantly recognizable worldwide, even as it complicated her artistic identity beyond the franchise. In 2026, Nikki Reed is 37 years old and has largely stepped away from Hollywood, focusing instead on environmental activism and sustainable business ventures. She lives with her husband Ian Somerhalder and their daughter Bodhi, although their marriage is not without emotional distance and ongoing tension due to demanding schedules and differing life perspectives. Despite these challenges, she has built a quieter life centered around nature, family, and advocacy work, prioritizing long-term purpose over fame. But her path to this point has been shaped by deep emotional scars that began long before Twilight. As a teenager, she went through her parents' divorce and a turbulent adolescence that included rehab and early exposure to adult pressures in Hollywood. Even after achieving fame, she struggled with being perceived primarily as a visual presence rather than a serious artist, which led to long-term frustration and creative disillusionment. The emotional strain of early fame, combined with personal instability, pushed her toward burnout and eventually a gradual withdrawal from acting. Her real journey is defined by reinvention, healing, and a search for meaning beyond Hollywood expectations. Chaska Spencer as Sam Yulee. Sam Yulee in Twilight is the silent but commanding leader of the Wolfpack, a figure burdened with responsibility, emotional restraint, and the heavy weight of protecting his community from forces beyond human control. Born on March 9, 1975, Spencer was 34 years old when he portrayed Sam across multiple films beginning in 2009, and the role introduced him to a global audience while highlighting his ability to carry quiet authority and emotional depth within a supernatural ensemble. In 2026, Chaska Spencer is 51 years old and living a private, disciplined life focused on stability, sobriety, and cultural work within indigenous communities. After years of personal transformation, he now dedicates much of his time to advocacy and support programs, avoiding Hollywood's spotlight while staying connected to meaningful acting projects. But his path to this point was built on a brutal personal collapse before success ever arrived. Spencer struggled with severe addiction to drugs and alcohol, reaching a point where he was nearly unable to continue functioning and was entering rehab just as his career opportunity emerged. The physical and emotional pain of withdrawal, combined with financial instability, placed him in one of the darkest periods of his life. Even after recovery, the weight of that past never fully disappeared. In recent years, he has remained committed to sobriety and community support, working with organizations that help others facing similar struggles. Sam Yulee remains the role that introduced him to the world, but his real story is one of survival, recovery, and rebuilding a life from the ground up. Gil Birmingham as Billy Black. A tribal elder whose presence in Twilight carries quiet authority and emotional depth, Billy Black guided his family through conflict with silence, wisdom, and cultural strength. Born on July 13, 1953, Birmingham was 54 years old when he played Billy Black across 5 films, starting in 2008. And the role brought him wider recognition while reinforcing his strength in portraying restrained, emotionally layered characters. In 2026, Gil Birmingham is 72 years old and living a quiet, solitary life in Los Angeles. He has never married and has no children, and over time this solitude has become a defining part of his existence. His health has declined due to chronic spinal pain, making daily life physically difficult. That emotional distance did not appear suddenly, but developed over decades. As his acting career developed, he often found himself limited by typecasting, which reinforced feelings of being overlooked, despite critical praise. Over time, these experiences pushed him toward indigenous storytelling and roles that allowed him to reconnect with identity and meaning. With recognition in films like Hell or High Water and the series Yellowstone, he slowly rebuilt his artistic presence, yet always outside the center of Hollywood attention. Today, his real journey reflects solitude, resilience, and a long search for belonging that continues to shape his life. Billy Burke as Charlie Swan. A quietly burdened sheriff trying to raise a daughter in a world he barely knows how to navigate, Charlie Swan in Twilight carries a rare kind of emotional silence. Born on November 25, 1966, Burke was 41 years old when he played Charlie across 5 films starting in 2008, and the role established him as the grounded emotional anchor of the saga. In 2026, Billy Burke is 59 years old and living a mostly isolated life following the end of his marriage to actress Pollyanna Rose. His relationship with his daughter, Bluesy Lily, has become distant over time, leaving him with a quiet but persistent emotional regret that defines much of his private world. He continues to work in television projects such as Fire Country, but his career has never fully reached major Hollywood stardom. What followed his Twilight years was a slow unraveling shaped by overlapping personal and physical setbacks. Earlier financial losses from a failed music investment pushed him close to bankruptcy, adding financial pressure to an already unstable period. As these struggles accumulated, emotional exhaustion gradually turned into depression, and alcohol became a temporary escape before he eventually stepped back and turned toward therapy and songwriting. Over time, the combination of physical pain, financial strain, and emotional distance reshaped his life into something quieter and more withdrawn. Anna Kendrick as Jessica Stanley. A sharp-tongued high school friend whose awkward honesty and fast-talking energy made Jessica Stanley one of the most relatable, ordinary voices in Twilight. Born on August 9, 1985, Kendrick was 22 years old when she played Jessica, and the role helped amplify her visibility while existing alongside a rapidly rising career that was about to explode beyond the franchise. In 2026, Anna Kendrick is 40 years old and continues to build a strong career in both film and music, balancing commercial success with more personal, reflective projects. Her life, however, has not been without emotional weight, as years of intense promotion schedules and public expectations left her mentally drained and vulnerable to anxiety and sudden panic episodes. It left her with a recurring sense of instability beneath her professional success. What followed was a gradual emotional rebuilding rather than a single turning point. After years of suppressing stress through constant work, the pressure eventually surfaced in the form of burnout and anxiety that forced her to reassess her boundaries with fame and relationships. Instead of continuing in the same cycle, she slowly shifted toward therapy and writing, using storytelling as a way to process what she had endured rather than escape it. Over time, Jessica Stanley became a symbol of her early career, but her real journey is defined by learning how to transform emotional exhaustion into creative expression while rebuilding a sense of personal stability. Alex Meraz as Paul LaHote. Paul LaHote in Twilight is remembered as the rawest and most volatile presence among the shapeshifters, constantly balancing aggression with loyalty. Born on January 10, 1985, Meraz was 24 years old when he played Paul in 2009, and the role gave him global exposure. In 2026, Alex Meraz is 41 years old and living a stable life with his wife Kim Meraz, whom he married in 2007, long before his rise to fame. Together, they have 2 sons, and their family remains the central anchor of his life, providing emotional stability in contrast to the unpredictability of the entertainment industry. That frustration, however, did not appear suddenly, but developed gradually as his career moved beyond Twilight. After the initial wave of popularity faded, he found himself repeatedly offered roles that emphasized physical appearance over depth, often reducing him to the same wolf pack image he had already outgrown. This lack of creative range, combined with subtle industry bias and repeated rejections for more dramatic roles, led to periods of depression and self-doubt. Yet each time he stepped back, it was his family that pulled him forward again, grounding him in a life outside of fame. Over time, his real story became one of resilience, cultural identity, and survival through the shifting pressures of Hollywood. Boo Boo Stewart as Seth Clearwaters, a gentle, wide-eyed teenage wolf whose innocence and loyalty brought unexpected emotional softness to the chaos of Twilight. Seth Clearwaters stood out as the youngest voice in a world dominated by rage, conflict, and supernatural tension. Born on January 21, 1994, Stewart was 16 years old when he stepped into the role of Seth in Twilight starting in 2010, and the character quickly became a symbol of purity and hope within the darker storyline of the Wolfpack. In 2026, Boo Boo Stewart is 32 years old and living in California, still unmarried and focused more on personal expression than Hollywood fame. He spends much of his time with family and devotes himself to painting, exhibitions, and artistic projects while maintaining a quiet lifestyle shaped by meditation and vegan living. But the path that led him here began with a sudden rise to fame that arrived too early to fully process. Becoming well known at just 16 meant losing much of his adolescence to public attention. Over time, that pressure developed into severe social anxiety, making public appearances and fan interactions emotionally overwhelming and often triggering panic responses. Eventually, he stepped back from the intensity of mainstream Hollywood and turned toward art as a form of healing, using painting and visual expression to process emotions that fame had once suppressed. Today, his real journey is defined by quiet recovery, self-discovery, and rebuilding identity through creativity instead of celebrity. So after revisiting the cast of Twilight, 2008, we can't help but see how drastically their lives changed far beyond the fantasy world they once built on screen. From global superstardom to personal struggles, heartbreak, and unexpected transformations, each of them walked a path no one could have predicted. Which Twilight transformation shocked you the most? If you enjoyed this update, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more cast stories where we reveal what really happened after the cameras stopped rolling.